welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today is April the 4th, and first I would like to say thank you to our volunteer and Shah staff who make this show possible. In the first part of today's show, we have again with us, and we are really honored to have Elder Tuslak Tom Sampson from the Startlift First Nation. And welcome to the show again, Elder Tuslak. And before we start the show, I took the permission of Elder Tuslak to ask a few questions. I think they are kind of very important in spite of they are very basic, but we don't hear them on TV usually or in any mainstream media. So Elder Tuslak, the first question is, we were talking about what is the root cause for what happened to the indigenous people, to the catastrophe that happened to the people of the land here? What is it? In a kind of simple sentence, how do you describe it?
Well, I guess at the beginning, our first coming together with the new people that came to this country, you know, the Queen of England or the Crown of England, the British Crown was our first people that we met with, or our people met with in Eastern Canada. And from Eastern Canada, they worked their way across the country till they came to British Columbia. And here in British Columbia, the colony was actually in the United States, which was called the Northwest Trading Company, which was in Oregon, and it worked its way into Canada and became Hudson Bay Company. Mm-hmm. And the Hudson Bay Company was represented by a man called Douglas, Governor Douglas. Mm-hmm. And Douglas was the one who first came into Victoria to begin the talk, I guess, or begin communicating with the people who've always lived here. And through this talk and communication, I guess the Crown, the government of the colonized government, colonial government rather, was representing the Crown of England. And I guess at that time they were instructed to see what they could do about acquiring land, so they could live here or stay here or camp or something like that. So through this talk with the colonial representative called Governor Douglas, who was the Governor Douglas at the time, mm-hmm. representing the colonial government, because Canada wasn't a government yet. Canada was not yet recognized as Canada. Mm-hmm. It was before pre-Confederation. Mm-hmm. So when they came here, they found that very much like in the United States, they had wars going on in all across North America with what is called the American government now. And when they came this west towards the Pacific, that's when Governor Douglas became involved with our people. And the starting point there wasn't all that bad. It was when they decided by trying to negotiate with us on our land, the land that we've always owned. Mm-hmm. So the colonial government then had the power with the instructions from Great Britain to make a treaty or agreement with the tribes here in this part of North America, Canada. So that was our first beginning with the talking with the colonial government, the colonizer. And it was quite easy for us because we knew who we were, who we still are, and we knew our people, our relationship with one another, mm-hmm. of all the tribes that speak the same languages as we do, based on family culture, tradition, ceremonies. All of these things we had in common, but it was controlled by two systems, one the matriarch system and one the patriarch system. And the matriarch system was the dominant voice. That
Mhm.
was the women. And the reason it was seen that way is because they had the ceremonial songs that ratified who we are, our names, our land, place where we live, and those songs came from them.
Mhm.
So the women then played a major role in in identifying some of the root the roots of our people,
Mhm.
and it was by name, our First Nations name. There was no such thing as Tom Sampson, because that he wasn't born yet, and he hadn't been given a name or turned into a Christian of some kind.
Mhm.
So that was the beginning of our talk with the British government, represented by Governor Douglas, who made what they call the Douglas Treaties. And the Douglas Treaties were very easy to come to because all the Crown wanted was to find a place to settle down, settle in a settlement where they could come in when they came into Canada, British Columbia, mostly to do exploration, see what the land was like, to see what was here. And what they found was exciting. They saw things that they had never seen before. You know, the salmon, the forest, the rivers, everything that was in the ocean was still all visible. And so I guess when Douglas reported that to England, the Queen there, or the Crown there, said, make a treaty with them in this colonial settlement. And that was the beginning of our relationship, or our, not so much a good
It
relationship.
cannot be a relationship. Relationship starts by mutual,
Yeah,
from both sides want to be in relationship. Here it was forced on the community.
and that
Indigenous
mutual understanding was about the encampment of the colonizer,
Mhm.
what's called Fort Victoria. That was the extent of what we knew, because we never spoke English, we didn't speak French, we only knew the language we knew. But what the English came up with is in a language in which they thought they were communicating was the Chinook jargon. And it is a jargon, it's not a language. And so some of these people then, I guess they learned this as they came across Canada, talking to different tribes, as well as Canada and the United States. And this Chinook jargon was used to start some kind of understanding with each other. And at that point in time, it was just one ship, just Governor Douglas' ship. I forget the name of the big ship they had now. But that was the beginning of our understanding, a mutual understanding that they would camp here and live in this place called Fort Victoria.
Mhm.
But because the colonizer saw so many things here, and the people who were exploring the country, they saw the forests, they saw everything was here.
All this wolf.
Yeah, the resources were so plentiful. And people came, well, how come it's going to waste? Nobody's using it. It wasn't going to waste. It was being carefully managed in a way that we could live in harmony with the land and those, what they call animals that were here already, whether they were on the land or in the ocean or the birds. All these meant something to us and still do.
Mhm.
We're very much still in communication with everything.
You did not look at them as a resource or as a wealth. It's just part of the environment you are living in.
Well, we were part of the same family.
Mhm.
We named every fish that was in the ocean. We named all of the other animals that were in the land, in the mountains. including everything that was in the sky. Everything had a name, and our relationship with them had been established by our people who've always lived here. The songs that come from the bird, the songs that come from the killer whale, the songs that come from the wolf, and everything. Everything had something to contribute to our civilization. And that came into conflict when the colonizer brought in more ships and more people. And as the people saw the animals that were so plentiful, the otter, the beaver, the wolf, everything, they saw that as a commercial commodity, fur. So the trading began to bargain with our tribes. We will buy everything that we ask from you. We'll pay for it. It was the same with the food that came from the ocean, the salmon, the seals, everything was already all there. So when the colonizer saw this place, he said, we can really make this work, and we can turn it into a big business and make it plentiful for everybody all over, not only here in British Columbia, but across the country, and then eventually shipped to other countries in the world, especially the salmon, because they used to put it in barrels and stuff like that, and preserve it and then take it away by ship. So our elders talked about that, and they said, you know, it was a good deal. It was a good deal. Our people were good businessmen. They weren't like the first prime minister of the country said that we were savages and we didn't know how to organize anything. But yet we were able to accommodate the first colonizers who came. We knew they needed lumber. We knew they needed to have somebody to cut it for them. So we worked to help them build Fort Victoria. And when they got that, they started to expand.
So we could say that the land issue is the root cause for the whole problem here and the question here in Canada.
Yeah, well, you know, when Governor Douglas made the treaty with us, it's called the Douglas Treaty, he's in the treaty it says that Governor Douglas is a representative of the Crown, not Canada. The representative of Great Britain, the Queen or King, whichever it was. He represented them. Canada wasn't a country yet. Canada didn't negotiate anything. It was with the British government. So then our agreement then was with the British Crown, the British government. And our understanding of that agreement is that it's not with Canada. So Canada then, as it began to colonize the country from the east and worked its way west, and they reached British Columbia, they saw the wealth of everything. And that's when the Canada decided that they wanted to make British Columbia part of the country.
Now, Elder Taslak, when the Canadian government now talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, do they mention anything connected to the root cause, the land question?
No, what they did there was they created, it's been an ongoing issue right from the day we allowed the fort to be built here. That's when the problem started, because they wanted more land, and they said, well, these Indians, these people don't know the value of land yet, so why don't we give them something, blankets, or I forget what the shillings they were called, and they were like next to nothing. But our people never saw that before, and they brought tools with them, axes and different things that we hadn't had here yet. We had tools to make our own canoes and boats, but we didn't have what they were bringing with them. And our people saw that as a good thing, to help us make canoes, boats, and even build houses. So when our people saw that, they said, well, maybe these people can help, and maybe we can help them. And that's where the government said, that Governor Douglas said, we will have a treaty with you. And the treaty will read that you are allowed to use all of your land that has not been purchased by the government. And when we purchase that land, if we buy it, then it becomes the land of Great Britain, the Crown, in England. That never happened. You know, it was always just about commodities, about fur, salmon, all the food that was going out from British Columbia into other countries in the world.
It was about opening the door for trade, not about come here and conquering all the land you have.
Yeah, it was never about the land. It was about business.
Mm-hmm.
And our people knew how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They just knew that these new people wanted something, and we had that something. We had everything that they wanted. But as time went by, the government of Canada, the government of England said, well, purchase as much land as you can get from the Indian people, and then we will pay for it.
And you said for shillings,
yeah,
is that correct? Which is like pennies, but
yeah.
in the...
And that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you look at the history of the interpretation of the Douglas Treaty, it's not what we agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the most outstanding question is, was the question ever raised with the British Crown that they had the right to take the land and colonize it like what they've done? And did they have the right, when the Constitution was transferred into Canada, that they would own the land? We never had a negotiation with Canada because Canada wasn't born yet. Mm-hmm. Our discussions were with the Crown of England. So we really, when we look at that history, our agreement and our understanding of the treaty is not with Canada, it's with the British Crown. And did the Queen or the King say, take all their land, whether they pay for it, we pay for it or not, just expropriate it, take it at will? Mm-hmm. If the Queen did that, then they're going to have to answer to our people for that, because we've never agreed with the British Crown on breaking that treaty. If it has been breached, then we have to address that, and that's what we see now. And we're going to court. We keep going to court with Canada, but the real issue, when we look deeper into it, the treaty is with the British Crown, not with Canada. So Canada then is going to have to address that question one way or another, because the Crown, did the Queen of England or the King say, you own all the land under the title of the British Crown and British colony? Did she tell him to do that? If she did that, or he did that, then they breached the original treaty, which was a treaty before Canada became a country. Mm-hmm. Canada was still a colony yet. They were still fighting with the Americans. They hadn't come here yet, an eastern part of Canada, North America.
Mm-hmm. I believe the whole treaty issue is, it wasn't mean. The Britain, in some point, we know that they say that the sun never set on the British Empire. British did not go everywhere and made a treaty to take other people's land. They went there by force. They did all kind of things to indigenous people, not just here, all around. So the idea of a treaty agreement, it's just like, I think it's a trick, especially when you read some of the treaties and you see some of them are only a white page and has only the signature. This is a process of somebody try to kind of rob somebody else, or uh, not really to have a real agreement with them. So, Elder Taslak, now coming to the second question, or now in the third question, why you think the Canadian government, we keep always, as you mentioned, the issue is, there is a problem here. Are we talking about the British, and later we have another layer, it's the Canadian state. But when we talk about the Canadian state, why they don't acknowledge the issue of the land? Why it's not out there when they talk about reconciliation or residential school? Why why they don't connect all these together in one context?
Well, I guess it comes down to the question of truth and reconciliation. If there is to ever be a reconciliation, they have to address the issue of land, because it's about land. It's always been about land.
Exactly.
And the way they acquired the land, it was never done in any legal way, and legal meaning whatever the law is in the country or even in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because the declaration that have been acknowledged in the world
United Nations.
is that those declarations clearly state there must be true settlement with the indigenous people before they can own any land, without question about how they got it, if they paid for it or haven't paid for it. That has never happened.
Mm-hmm.
So for the treaty tribes that are pre-Confederation,
Mm-hmm.
the real question we want to know is, did the British Crown say take all their land no matter what? And if the Queen of England, the Crown said that, then we don't know about that. We've never been told. All we know is what the Constitution says, you know. But that, by the way, that's kind of changing now too. They're acknowledging that there are some legal rights that have to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And the Crown knows that. They knew that as late as 1997, they knew that they never had extinguished Aboriginal title and Aboriginal rights. In 1997, they knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they continue to pretend that they own everything, but they've never dealt with the land. In 1997, they knew this. That's just a few years ago. So then the truth and reconciliation has got to go deeper than just, it's not just about how we've been treated, you know, by the colonizer. When we talk about the residential schools, the boarding homes, the murdering of our women and girls, they can't even deal with that because I don't know, I've often asked that question, you know, why can't they just tell the truth? You know, genocide was the first agenda item on the government's agenda, as well as the Christian world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a document written about how the church and the government collaborated and making sure that we would never understand or know who we were. It may take generations to do it, but get it done. And that's happened.
And you just actually told me, Elder Taslak, before we start the show, that the Pope Francis denied the responsibility of the church to what happened to the indigenous people. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Well, I guess, you know, one of the big problems we have is many of our young people have been educated. You know, they've become lawyers and judges and crown prosecutors even. So they've forgotten about their own law. They only know what they've been trained to think when they go to from kindergarten to university. They've been trained to think differently, and that's what we're trapped with. So when we talk to young lawyers and young people who've managed to get a master's degree in law or something like that, they say, well, this is what I learned in school at university, and that's how I got my master's degree. Well, that doesn't work. It's never worked. So sometimes, like I said at one point, the colonizer is now our own people. We've taken the place of the colonizer. We have become the colonizer. The lawyers, the judges, the school teachers, we have now become them.
Because you live in that monetary system, because, but coming back to the Catholic Church, before we start the show, you mentioned something about the Pope in the Catholic Church.
Well, I guess the laws of the church, the hierarchy of the church, I think they're using that as a process of denial. You know, the Pope can't say he was involved in the residential school issue.
Yes, sorry, yes, it's about residential school, of course.
He actually said that, you know, that he has nothing to apologize for. The church, as head of the church, he can't apologize. But who granted the authority to put those residential schools in place? It came from upstairs. So it's just like the Queen of England. Did she tell the Prime Minister to take all the land away? Well, the church done the same thing. They're in denial about what happened. So long as it's in denial, like in 1997, when Aboriginal title and treaty and indigenous rights it was never been extinguished. They knew this, and the church knew what was happening in the residential school, but they continued to deny. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we reach the point of reconciling these extreme differences? The only way I see that happening is if they let our people go back to the culture, the history of what they know, who they are. And they know the land. They know everything in the land. We knew that. We still know it. So we've come a long ways I think, as trying to be part of the citizenships of Canada. But Sir J. MacDonald he's a ghost in our closet. He keeps coming back and he says, they're still savages. Even if they can read and write, they'll always be savages so long as they listen to their parents or grandparents or dinosaur.
Yes, to the dinosaur of the truth, Elder Tesla. Elder Tesla, who, by the way, I'm getting a sign that we are out of time, but I'm glad really that we talk about this issue. It's really important because you don't hear it anywhere else. And it's always honor to hear from you what you think about these important matters. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elder Tesla. And thanks for watching this part. We'll be back shortly. We come back to this part of Indigenous Voice. We are really honored to have with us Patrick Harriet from the Métis Nation in Greater Victoria, the president of the Métis Nation in Greater Victoria. Patrick, welcome to the show. And would you please tell us a little bit history about the Métis Nation and their presence here in the area in Victoria?
Well, The Métis have been here in Victoria for pretty much as long as Fort Victoria has been here. We came with Sir James Douglas, and I'm sure that some have trickled here even before that because we followed the fur trade, and we also made up a group called the Votageurs, which were sort of the militia around Fort Victoria originally. And there was a Métis person by the name of Mackay that went up and founded Nanaimo at the behest of Sir James Douglas. Isabella Ross, which Ross Bay and the Ross Bay Cemetery is named after, was also Métis. So the Métis people have been here for a very long time.
Historically rooted in all across this land here.
All across Canada, yeah.
In your organization, Patrick, what is the goal of your organization? What do you do? What kind of projects you do there?
Basically we offer a place for a community to get together, and we try to find as much grant funding as possible to put on events and like I said, do some culture. For instance, our community has just done a ribbon skirt workshop, which is a traditional clothing for Métis people, and the amount of responses we had was pretty amazing. We thought, maybe 10, 20 people might want to make these, but it ends up that it was more like 60 people, and there's quite a lot of interest in reclaiming our culture because it was lost for so long. Many people only find out that they have Métis heritage later in life, and it's one of those things where because of persecution, those that could pass as European did so to not face persecution, but now being an official recognized Aboriginal group in Canada, as well as some of the court cases that have come out in the Métis' favor, it's really opened a lot of people's eyes, and they've looked deeply into their culture or into their family's history, and found that they do have Métis heritage, and now they're trying to reclaim that culture
and
heritage.
reconnect with it.
Yeah.
What about language? Do you work on language project?
Well, in fact, for the first time ever, it's very exciting. The First Peoples Cultural Council just received a lot of money from the last budget for language. And for the first time, Michif, which is the Métis language, will be able to apply for funding in order to have our community relearn our Michif language.
Would you tell us a little bit about Michif language? And
well, there's different Michifs, just like there's
different accents, you mean, or dialect of the same main language.
Exactly, and depending on where in Ontario through to BC, there can be quite a lot of Cree in the language, or quite a lot of French in the language. But traditionally, or historically, it's been sort of a mix of the two, where it's Cree verbs and French nouns. So it's very bilingual, almost straight down the middle.
Kind of an exact representation
of the culture of
yes,
Métis.
exactly. Which makes sense. And
however, there are many Métis people that, like my heritage, for instance, I'm half French Canadian, but that's not my Métis side. On my Métis side, there's no French whatsoever, but I'm Cree, Soto, Scottish, English, Irish Métis. So it's difficult to really pin down, this is Métis. However, there are certain things that I think most of us identify with, and that's fiddle music, and our own style of fiddling music. It's different from other ones. It's got a crooked tempo, they say, where it doesn't quite go 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's something different again.
Once again, kind of the mix between a Cree verb and And now,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, actually, that was my second question about, or the following question about music, because it's another aspect of, uh, one common thing for people is their language and music and the culture thing they do usually.
Dancing.
Hmm.
Along with beadwork, we're known as the flower bead people to many other people, and yeah, a lot of flower beadwork was thought to come from other cultures, but really it was traded far and wide from Métis people that spent a lot of time beading through those long winters.
Do some of the Métis community stay in the land in a way that they become a farming community and have a kind of a village ceremonies and culture relate to Métis community, or mainly trade, or kind of uh, 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 is there kind of sort of village kind of, you could say, following the farming style?
Well, in fact, the Red River settlement was the largest village at that time. In the middle 1800s, and in the Red River settlement, there was about 12,000 people in, I'd like to say, 1860, and 10,000 of those were mixed Métis people. So really, that was the Métis village. And previous to that, say in the early 1800s up to that point, there were buffalo hunts where a large group of Métis people, including women and children and everything, would spend quite a long time traveling in the summers for the hunt in order to make pemmican, which was a very important source of food as well as a trade good during the fur trade times. But then they would come back hopefully in enough time to harvest the grain that they planted. So it was interesting, both a agricultural farming community, but it was also a hunter-gatherer community at the same time. Once again, those two cultures sort of met in the Métis people.
I mentioned that because, when you're talking about the Scottish society or a French society, a lot of farming background, and people live off the land by farming certain fruit or vegetables. So I'm sure that kind of what they brought also with them, and follow with that the style of life of village when you are in the gathering, and you're talking about dancing and music, it's all kind of together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting that what became Winnipeg and what was known as the Red River Settlement before that was very insulated from the outside world. Because if you think of the geographical location of Winnipeg, at the time of the 1800s, there was nothing anywhere. It was a long ways to the next major population center. So basically Métis people married other Métis people, and there was no sort of new influx of, or no large influx of new people. So that's one of the reasons that distinct culture and language emerged.
Through our program here, Indigenous Voice, we have many activists from the Métis community, and for example, Victoria Bruden, who work on women issues, and it seems they have a vibrant community here, and many of them are lawyers and working very hard in the community. Would you tell us a little bit more about the Victoria community of the Métis Nation?
Well, it's truly amazing. Métis people being usually not a visibly Indigenous community, although some are, some aren't. But really, Métis people are in every walk of life, whether that's lawyers, doctors, farmers still. Really, there's no way of knowing who may be Métis and who isn't. There's no traditional job set or anything like that. Yeah, I don't really know what to say. Except
But I mean, they have a strong community here, and
absolutely.
Like and which was nice to see. I mean, and I have very strong lawyer women's here coming to talk. It usually, you know, it's among many indigenous community, especially when it comes to women issue. They are so oppressed. They don't have the same kind of equal right like men. So when you see a lot of lawyers and, as you said, doctors coming, women, this is kind of very nice to see, because again, it's not only one group of human people can able to do that. Any group of people, as long as they have equal opportunity and proper, environment, they can do anything.
Oh, absolutely. Seeing different, I just came back from the Métis Nation Governing Assembly, where all the presidents from the different communities all across British Columbia all come together to discuss how to move forward as a nation in British Columbia. And I'd say at least half of the presidents were women. And if you look at the different governing bodies for Métis people in British Columbia, our president's a woman. In Alberta, as well as in Ontario. So 3 out of 5 of the governing members are led by women. So I'm not sure about other cultures, but I think the women in the Métis Nation are a strong voice.
Actually, I do this job here as a volunteer, but my main job...
Me too. I'm a volunteer.
Good. But my main job is electrician, and in my school, we had only actually 2 women in our class, and I think it was around 24 people. But one of them was a Métis woman, and she is one of my best friends. So you're saying that, I just remember Ashley, my friend. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And you've met Victoria Pruden as well.
Yes.
And she was actually the president before I was here in Victoria, but she's now the chair of the Métis Women of British Columbia.
Bridge for Women also, she is also...
Absolutely, she's the executive director of Bridges for Women, and we've worked closely together in having a Métis Women's Healing Circle at Bridges for Women that have helped many of our community members through different traumas, and it's such a valuable resource.
I saw Victoria playing a big role in, there is a march every year for the missing and murdered women.
Yes.
And again, this is what I mean about it. Yeah, you see person, you don't know they're Métis, but there are many of Métis are proud to say, I'm a Métis and I'm standing with that. With that position, or talking about, like standing up to talk about murder and missing women, to take their role in kind of solidarity with the rest of the Indigenous community.
And it's really great to see that more and more, especially in the last, I'd say, 10 years, not only are people rediscovering their heritage, but Métis people are becoming more confident in standing up and saying, I'm Métis, and just putting it out there. Well before it might have been something that was talked about at home, but it wasn't necessarily expressed to the general public. So it's good to see that our community is gaining more confidence in who they are.
Nice. Now, we were talking about Victoria. What about the rest of the island? Is there also, like in Nanaimo, similar things like?
Oh yeah, we have 7 communities on the island. So let's see if I can get them all.
Yeah, please.
Here in Victoria, up in the Cowichan Valley, Nanaimo, Campbell River, and Courtenay, as well as Port Alberni, and we consider it in our region, but it's not on the island, is Powell River.
Okay.
So I think now all over British Columbia there's 38 communities.
And there's a communication, and as you mentioned, just you meet regularly, is that correct? Kind of between these organizations, is there kind of a regular annual meeting?
Yes.
The exchange experience?
Yeah, the Métis Nation of British Columbia has an annual general meeting in the fall, and then in the spring there's the Métis Nation Governing Assembly, where all the presidents get together with the Métis Nation British Columbia Board of Directors, and sort of as a governing council we sort of put forward different ideas on how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then as regions, we try to get together at least quarterly. But this year we're really hoping to have a Métis rendezvous. So basically a large celebration of Métis culture, food, dance, music, stories, artwork. And it used to happen annually, but the last one was about 10 years ago. It was called Red River West. And it had gone on for quite a while and became known throughout most of Western Canada as sort of the first stop on the rendezvous trail, as it were, here at this end. And then people would visit other rendezvous, including the most famous one, which is in Batoche, Saskatchewan.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, beside language, music, what else the Métis Nation Greater Victoria do? Like, is there any program for youth, I'm sure?
Well, we have monthly potlucks, which is a good way when you eat together. It's that to me is what forms a community. And we do have different youth programs, and I can't say that there's anything, any one thing that we do, because we have virtually no core funding. So whatever we can apply for as far as grants go, that's the programs that we can put on. And a lot of that is dependent on, we have different youth and different board members that come on that have an idea of, hey, we should do this or we should do that. So we're always looking for enthusiastic members to help write those grant proposals and get that money in order to put on these different cultural events. Otherwise, we really, like I said, have no core funding. I'm not paid. No one's paid at our organization.
So you mean the community involvement? It's the most. This is the whole capital you have in your.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about sweat equity, as they say. So the more people that we can get excited about our culture, the more people, the more hands we have trying to put on these cultural events.
Is there any support, for example, from the in BC in the province from the overall Métis Nation? Like, do they support local small community if they need some to take on some project, for example, language, music, or only you ask like the provincial or federal government?
The Métis Nation of British Columbia gets very little funding themselves. So for the first time this year, we've gotten some government capacity funding. But in this latest round that was just announced this fiscal year, so at the start of this month, basically, it's enough to pay for our small office about 9 months out of the 12 months out of the year, and I think maybe 3 months of our phone and telephone bill. So it's something, but our community has been volunteering, sorting recycling once a month to help pay the bills. So we're really on our own at this point.
Just recently, I think a couple of years ago, with the major ruling, was in Daniel. Okay, so
yep. So we're considered Indians under the Indian Act, but really nothing has really been resolved. I mean, right now we're just about to be consulted as to what Métis people think our rights are as Aboriginal people, as well as what reconciliation means to us. So right now, as best as I can, I'm trying to prepare my community to be consulted, because without some prior information and some deep reflection and contemplation on this subject, it's hard to have a meaningful consultation.
Exactly.
Right. So, and I know that the federal government wants to do consultation and then write legislation and pass it before the next election cycle. So it's going to be quite the fast pace right now in order to have that timeline met. And I'm a little concerned that for meaningful consultation, having hurry up kind
Connecting
of
that
thing.
with
Right?
the election cycle, exactly. And that's what I'm thinking right now. It's
And I only wish that if they were truly wanting this to succeed, I would have hoped that they could have started this at the start of their mandate and had 4 years to do this as opposed to a year and a half. But at least there's someone willing to come to the table and discuss these issues. So even if it's a first step, even if we can have a meaningful talk about what rights and reconciliation looks like, that's a step in the right direction. That's more than the steps that we've had in the past.
it's about watching the clock, about, okay, what to prepare as ammunition for the next cycle of elections, and not really about the principle of reconciliation.
Well, yes.
But, would like to finish that on a positive note. To tell me what do you like to see here, more involvement, not only from the Métis community, other community. What do you like them to do? Like, do you have an open, like when you have a potluck, is it open for the whole community? to
Oh,
come?
absolutely.
Perfect, okay.
Absolutely.
Do you like to invite the community for that? On
Well,
the show? I mean, no, no. You don't bring your food with you if you want to come.
well, it is a potluck after all.
Yes, exactly.
But no, we meet at the Native Friendship Center. We have a really good relationship with the Victoria Native Friendship Center. It's a really wonderful place that we have here in Victoria. And I'm really happy that our community has slowly but surely made good relationships with a lot of the First Nations who we are very blessed to be on this traditional territory and to be able to make this our home.
And you share a lot of history with them, and both of you were under the oppression. Yeah. Patrick, we are out of time, but please, this show here, it's for all the Indigenous community. Any activists from the Métis Nation, Greater Victoria, have any message, and anyhow we can help to spread your message, please let us know, and come again on the show again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being on the show today, and thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice.